Yo, yo, we are back for another weekly Wednesday. So I did things a little bit differently this week. Instead of just putting out a status asking for any question, I put out a status earlier today asking for questions regarding peak week. So hopefully this helps you focus your questions a little bit more and kind of will cover a broad spectrum of questions, over the course of the weeks to come. This is episode number 8 or 9, I want to say. I got to double check that. I should have known coming in. But what we're going to do is we're going to dive into all things peak week. So I put out a status once again earlier in the day. Had some people ask me some questions. For those of you who are tuning in live, go ahead and ask me questions. I'll get to those as they come in. So Lydia is always asking me very good questions pretty much every week. So we're going to cover hers first. And Lydia's was traveling with meals to shows, driving or flying. Any problems and tips for packing food as a carry-on? So I've personally never flown to a show, so I can't say that as a fact. Actually, some people in here could probably help with that a little bit more. But what I would say, as far as like driving to a show and packing meals, I personally like to just use like Ziploc bags and write a label on everything. Thanks, Matt. So it's number 9 anyway. So I use like Ziploc bags and like write my meals on it and like what time I'm supposed to eat it, or use sticky notes. That just makes it really, really easy for me. Just so I know that I'm not, missing anything. As far as flying, sometimes, you have to be a little bit, wary on what you have. Obviously you don't want to have too much liquids when you're flying or whatever, because they don't like that. But what I would recommend is take like dry goods. So if you could, what you're carbing up on, if it's like a dry good, you could totally get away with that. Just they might, frown upon, food that's already cooked for whatever reason. But I think you'd be all right. So Sarah, I don't know if that's a serious question or not, but anyway. So Lydia, as far as like traveling, I would say just pack everything ahead of time, label it so it's very easy to see. And then, if you're driving, don't be afraid to pull over and eat. Make sure you're obviously having plenty of water. Because what I think a lot of people, they fail to do is that they forget to, eat on time and especially drink. And that way, the carbs are actually going to be going to the right places, especially if you're carbing up the day before. If you're traveling, ideally, I'd like to see you, go a day early so you're not carbing up as you're traveling. That's just my personal opinion. All right, so Rachel asked a bunch of questions. So I'll get to these individually. I'll read the whole question, then I'll cover everything back to it. Rachel asked, what modifications do you typically make to workouts during peak week? Do you utilize pre-workouts / BCAAs? Any changes in water intake? Changes in meal timing? So we'll start with the first one. And what do I typically change as far as the workouts go during peak week? So obviously, during peak week, we don't want to be busting our ass. We want to have our time where we're actually going to be recovering from our workouts. So especially like for bodybuilders who are flexing every single muscle on stage, you definitely don't want to be sore. Sometimes, depending on when you're working out, let's say you don't want to train legs like a day or two before the show, just because sometimes you see like water retention in the legs, and you obviously want to look as hard as possible, at least if you're a bodybuilder, so you don't want to be like training legs. So ideally during peak week, it's more of a step back in training. Obviously you're still training, all the muscle groups, but you don't want to be, over exerting yourself, because you need to be able to recover from those, because you are going to spend potentially 20 to 30 minutes on stage. For bodybuilders, that could be very, very taxing. So you want to make sure that the workouts are easily recovered from. So I guess that's the most important. Obviously, you're going to want to know what your volume is going into peak week, and then it's really just a step down from your volume. It still should be challenging, but not as challenging to make you super sore, where you have to have days and days to recover. Do I use pre-workouts and BCAAs during peak week? Yes, absolutely. I use both. I do tend to take out BCAAs just as a precautionary a couple days out, just because sometimes, depending on your BCA, if you have artificial colors or artificial sweeteners, sometimes those two can have some effects on water retention or just make people bloated. So I just move those as a precaution. If you don't have artificial sweeteners or artificial colors in yours, you could pretty much take them up to the day of the show, in my opinion. Pre-workouts, yeah, I definitely use them all week. I really don't think that you're going to need to use a ton of pre-workout like you usually would, just because the workout should be a little bit easier leading into peak week. So maybe just dial back the dosage all week. And then any changes in water intake. So this is always a big one, water intake. And it's going to be on a person-to-person basis. Usually I do not like cutting people's water. The only time I would ever cut someone's water is if like a bikini competitor needed to come in softer. And notice, how I mentioned that, if they need to come in softer. More often than not, the classes want you to come in very, very hard. Bodybuilding, figure, even physique, they want you to come in crisp. Bikini, sometimes, depending on the organization, likes you to come in a little bit softer. That's the only time I would ever cut someone's water. Now, I've actually never done it. I feel like all the organizations like the bikini girls to be a little bit harder, in my opinion, at least at the pro level, and those are the people I typically work with, so I don't usually cut people's water. Now, I do give certain amounts of water depending on the person, so yeah, that is very true. I do manipulate their water by increasing it. Usually, especially if someone's carbing up on, let's say a ton of carbohydrates, let's say like 500-600, you're definitely going to want to have them drinking 2+ gallons of water that day, or even in that week. If you're going to do like a rapid backload and eat 1,000 grams of carbs in a day, then you're going to need to take in like 3 gallons of water. So that's the only time I really manipulate water is by increasing it. I don't really decrease water. Changes in meal timing. Throughout the first 6 days of peak week, I don't really change any type of meal timing in general. The only time I will time out meals is basically the morning of. So depending on when you're going on on stage, we'll have a rough time. Usually I like my clients to try to get the order of events, and that way I could have a tentative timeline for them. So it's not too easy to judge sometimes, because we know that the shows usually don't start on time, the classes take longer than expected, so it's always going to be a very tentative timeline. But yes, I will time out meals accordingly on show day, just to make sure that they're going to look as good as possible and be as full as possible. Obviously, I don't want them hungry on stage either. I don't want them flattening out. So I will time out the meals roughly every hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the individual and also depending on the size of the meal. I will time those out just the day of and then throughout the day. If it's a morning and a night show, the whole day will be timed out. If it's just a straight through show, then I'll just lead them up into the show. Let's see here. I know I saw a question roll in. What is one of my go-to meals during prep? That's a great question. I tend to eat a lot of different things. In my previous preps, like I was eating pancakes for breakfast every day. Now I have Greek yogurt and granola. I tend to eat a variety of things. I usually eat, the typical chicken and rice at least once a day. I prefer like Asian food, honestly, so I'll make like a lot of stir fries. It's just a good way to get like your vegetables in. So those are my go-to during prep. Let's see, anyone else? Holly, I'm going to get to that in another question. That's coming up. And sure, absolutely, Rachel. Okay. So Karen said, is there no such thing as peak week? That was a question. And she said, meaning this, should you be lean enough and coast into the show, or there's no real magic is done of the week, or is there things that work best, typically even in the top shape? So once again, guys, I do have a hard time reading and talking at the same time, and you know that. But anyway, I get what Karen's trying to say. Is basically a lot of people glorify peak weeks, and they think that it's this magical time where you're going to look like, you're not even close to stage, and then the next thing you know, you're going to be phenomenal. You're going to have a standout physique. And what Karen is trying to say is that if you're not in shape leading into peak week, then you should just forget about it. So all the work has to be done in the weeks and months leading up to that week before you could start to make any kind of changes. If you're 10 pounds over stage weight and you have 10 pounds of fat to lose and you're going to try to carb load or you're going to try to water cut or you're going to try to do any of these magical tricks that these coaches will tell you to do, you're not going to get the result because you're just straight up too fat. So that's what Karen's getting at, is that sometimes these peak week packages that these coaches will put out are more or less fluff. And they're not really going to do anything for you. They may actually do even more harm than good because of all the crazy manipulations. You might, if you do have, in fact, 5 to 10 pounds to lose, it might just be easier just to go into the show not doing anything, and you might actually look better if you were to make all these drastic changes. And Matt also made a good comment. I know Matt's tuned in here, Matt Jackson, not Matthew Selting, because no one likes him. But the term peak week bothers me, he said, like nails on a chalkboard. When he sends out peak week plans, he usually calls it the final week, not peak week. And Matt, I actually might start doing that. It just has a different connotation to it, and really it's just the final week leading into the show. It's not this magical period. So Matt, I might steal that from you. Not 100% sure. Maybe 2018, I'll start rolling those out. All right, moving right along. Bronwyn said, considering she has not done a peak week, do you have to mentally prepare yourself, or are there things that you need to do beforehand that help you that week? Is late in the week harder for newbies? Do the nerves? Shows coming up possible? So anyway, what Bronwyn's getting at, she hasn't competed yet, and she's kind of curious of what leads you through peak week. So Bronwyn, first things first, like I said before, we need to make sure that you're absolutely ready before going into the show. And hopefully, at least with my clients, this is what I like to do. I actually like to test their peak weeks. So for instance, with Matt, I know Matthew Selting, he's tuned in now, so I'll talk about him. So with him, we actually practice our peak weeks and weeks out beforehand. So hopefully all the stress and the guesswork is already done at that point in time, and then we already know exactly what we're going to do and exactly how your body's going to work. So hopefully by then we don't really have any stress. It's just about executing the plan. Now, there's still going to be other nerves just because you know that you're about to step on stage, especially for first timers, so that can be challenging. Now, does it get harder as the week goes on? Yeah, I think so, just because the nerves, especially for a first timer. But as far as like executing the plan, usually by the end of the week, you're eating more food than you normally are, depending on how the method that we choose to carb up. So I feel like actually the middle of the week is a little bit harder, and then by the end of the week, if we start carbing you up, it actually does get a little bit easier. Things to do beforehand just to make it easier on yourself, especially like for bikini competitors, because there is a lot to gather. I will send out a checklist for all my bikini competitors so they don't miss anything to pack. Although it is just a very rough list, it's a huge step in the right direction. So especially for them, I like to send it out, and that way they're not guessing on what they should be bringing. So that'll help. But as far as anything else to mentally prepare yourself, I mean, like I said, we're gonna try to get you ready weeks and weeks ahead of time. So really, it's just about executing the plan. You can't ever really be ready for a competition until you do it, and because you never know what to expect. You could even go to bodybuilding shows, but until you actually stand on the stage, you're just going to have to experience it for yourself. All right, let's see. Somebody else threw in some comments here. Would you call it final week still if it's your first of consecutive shows for the season? No, I guess not. I wouldn't call it my final week if you're doing multiple final weeks, Matt said. Thanks for answering that, Matt. All about planning? Yeah, for sure. You got to plan leading into peak week, and that's why I usually like to send my peak week plans out, by Wednesday or Thursday the week before. That way everybody has it. They could ask all the kind of questions that they want, and there's no guesswork involved. All right, going on. All right, Matt asked another good question here. Matt Selting asked the benefits / preferences of carb loading versus deloading versus not changing them at all for peak week. So deloading, Matt, you gotta ask, help me out with this one. Do you mean depleting, Matt Selting? If you're talking about depleting versus not changing them all, I guess we'll have to narrow down the question. So if Matt, you could comment on this real quick and just brush up on that question. So what Matt is getting at is, what are the benefits of, carbing up to cutting back on carbs or just not changing them at all? And this is something that honestly I'm going to start or end of the week. Okay, gotcha, Matt. So basically he's talking about the timing, and that's going to be different for everybody. Some people carb up the day before, some people carb up the 3 days leading up to the show. Some people carb up, 5 days in advance and then slowly taper down. And some people just don't change any of that. I'm not a fan of not changing anything. I do find that's kind of the lazy way of riding up a peak week. I feel like there is always some kind of changes that you could make, as far as carbs or as far as, water manipulation goes or as far as sodium loading. Ideally, if somebody can handle it and absorb all the carbs, I find it easiest to eat the carbs the day before the show. That way, and I guess it's a little bit more risky of a method, but if we've practiced it before, we know your body can process it, then we can handle it. But if you have to push it back, let's say like 2 days, then we might have to go on like a Thursday to Friday load, and it would be 2 slow days. So that's my personal preference, is maybe the day before, maybe 2 days before if we have to split it up. I really don't like front loading. I feel like front loading just makes you look worse and worse and worse over the course of the week. That's just my personal preference. It can be done correctly, but I feel like that's actually a harder method to do because you have to let somebody spill and then come back down. I feel it a little bit easier to slowly increase someone's carbs leading in, or just give them a 1-day spike if we had enough practice and know their metabolism better. All right, Emily asked, I love some of the above questions, and like to add, if you deplete water on every athlete or if you depend on the individual, what you like to do depends on water, if anything, as far as supplements or Expel. So I haven't personally used Expel. Aren't you and Brandon Wells the same person? Definitely not. No, that's weird. I know who Brandon Wells is, but no, we're not the same person, Joe. Very similar names. Brandon does good photography work, if that's the brand you're talking about. But Emily, getting back to your question, I don't really like to manipulate someone's water too much, just because I feel like it has more harm than good. The only time I do manipulate someone's water is if I would, want like a bikini competitor to look a little bit softer. Depending on the organization, sometimes they like to look a little bit softer, but if it's the NPC or if it's the IPE, like those people really like their bikini girls pretty diced. So I really just give them more water, if anything, just to help them look a little bit drier. Speaking of drier, and Holly and Lacey's question kind of tied in with each other. So I'll answer these together. And then if anybody has any more questions, I'll go ahead and ask. Since these videos are a little bit more topic-centered, they're going to be a little bit shorter, which is totally fine. They will be replayed on YouTube if you guys want to rewatch them at all. So Lacey and Holly asked kind of the same question. What are your thoughts on pre-staged meals to maximize a full yet dry look? I typically do a fat and quick carb and a little bit of water. And then Holly asked, let me go back here because they kind of tie in. They're pretty much the same thing. She said, what do you have your clients eat right before they go on stage? So those are basically the two same questions. Lacey got a little bit more into detail. So Lacey, I did, earlier in the video, I talked about timing out their meals according to when they're going on stage. So basically, I at least, depending on what time you're going on stage, if you go, I like to see you eat 2 meals for sure. if not 3, depending on what time you're going out in the day. Obviously, if you're going to be going on at like noon or 2 or in the evening, you'll be eating more meals. So I do time out their meals leading up. And then, of course, yes, right before I have my athletes come on stage, typically what I have them do is kind of similar to what you're doing, but a little bit different. I have my clients, eat, let's say, like 2 hours out from the stage, and then like 30 minutes, I actually have them take like a little bit of caffeine in their pre-workout, and then I have them take like a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I just have them drink that down. So there's obviously going to be a little bit of water in there. And then that would be a little bit of quick carbs too, potentially. Could be in there like dextrose. Sometimes I have my people take candy. Now, depending on the candy, I've had my athletes take in, let's say like Skittles or gummy bears, or some people that burn through that a little bit too quickly. I have them taking some kind of like peanut butter and chocolate. So that's where you're talking about a little bit more fat, so it takes longer to break down. Basically, though, what we're trying to get at is right before the stage, don't expect a ton of things to happen. If you are, in fact, taking in very simple sugars, that may help increase blood volume. But ideally, I think salt is going to have a little bit more effect. So I would actually go the salt route before I went with more carbs. And that way, it's going to hit you a little bit faster, and it'll help you catch a pump. Hopefully, you already carbed up enough where it's going to help you pump up. So as far as like right before the stage, don't expect a ton to happen. Obviously, you're not going to be drinking a ton of water right before you go on. Just a few sips, with your pre-workout or the caffeine, just to help you tighten up, to help draw some of that extra cellular water into the muscle. Just because caffeine is like a little bit of a diuretic. So if there is any extracellular water, it'll help draw it in. But really, right before we go out on stage, the carbon up should be done. And if anything, it's just a little bit of candy and a little bit of salt just to increase the blood volume. Now, for people that are like in bikini or that are, once again, maybe they're not like super shredded, it's not going to make that much of a difference. It might help a little bit, but it's not going to be a lot. Now, for a bodybuilder, if you slam, let's say like 2 grams of sodium, 30 minutes before you go out on stage, and you take, a couple of, let's say like Reese's, like Matt said, a couple of Reese's peanut butter cups, and you start pumping up, and then you're going to be on stage for a very, very long time, those might actually help you. So with someone that's very lean, it's going to affect them a little bit more. It's going to help a little bit more. If you're not quite dialed in, it's not going to help. So Lacey, to sum things up and kind of to sum up peak week in general, just because Lacey said, like, basically the words that everybody wants to hear. They want to look full, they want to look dry, and, for bodybuilders, they just want to be, like, exploding or whatever. The work really should be done weeks ahead of time, in my opinion. So in order to look full, in order to look dry, you have to have enough muscle. You have to be lean enough. And then you can start making these very, very fine details. I feel like a lot of people spend and focus on their peak week programs when in reality they're just not going to do for them what they're expecting. Now, if you're already lean enough, if you already have enough muscle mass, and then you do put together a well thought out peak week program, and you've practiced it, you have your carbs down, you have your water intake down, you manipulated your sodium accordingly, then and only then will you see the results that you're looking for. So as far as a full dry look, as far as the peak week in general, like Matt was saying, the final week, it's not some magical time. It's going to be a fine tuning, and the more stage ready you are, the more that you'll be able to see the changes. Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And Matt just summed it up too. Matt is also a very good coach, and he, Matt and I agree on a lot of things. And he said, if you're not dry, if you're not stage ready, you're just not going to see it. So, guys, next week I haven't decided the topic yet, but I think these will kind of help us steer our knowledge, help us learn a little bit more on specific topics. Once again, these will all be put on YouTube. They'll be in their own separate category. Now we'll at least be able to go back and know that this one's about peak week. The next one can be about whatever. Once again, everybody, thank you for watching. Once again, weekly Wednesday, 7 o'clock on my Facebook. You guys are catching it live. It'll be replayed on YouTube tomorrow. Have a good night, and we will see you next week.